Hello friends, welcome back to another video. So I recently got my copy of Absolution by Jeff Vandermeer in the mail. First of all, I have some things to say about the copy I received because it's very odd. But yes, I thought it would be fun to do a little reading vlog and get lost in Area X again. I did start this last night. I read the first 50 pages or so, and I do have some commentary to make already. I'm keeping some notes in the front just to kind of keep track of my thoughts. But before we start, before we do our first little reading montage, if you have a copy of this, first of all, if you got the hardcover, it should look like this. I'll put a picture on the screen. It should have holographic text, right? Like the font. I somehow received my copy, a paperback, that supposedly says it doesn't release until October 2025. I received it, but without the holographic detail. It's just like this sort of semi-matte kind of silver. And there's also quite a few typos already that I don't think were done for any like literary reason. So that's a little bit weird, but it's not an ARC. It doesn't say anywhere on here that it's like uncorrected proofs or anything like that. It is like the book. Like, how do I have an early copy? And then I just got it off Amazon, so it's not like from some weird like third-party publisher. And now when you go on Amazon and you click to see what the price is for the paperback, it says it's unavailable. So I just have this weird, strange anomaly copy. You guys let me know if you have a paperback and if it looks like mine. Is it full of typos, and does it have silver font instead of holographic? So I'm already entering Area X. There's already weird anomaly stuff happening. There is a little bit of a distance between the narrative and us as the reader, because old Jim, who's the character that we're following, he's like a minor character from one of the previous books that I do not remember. He's looking at footage from Area X. So we are in Deadtown 20 years prior, like 20 years before the anomaly. So he's just looking at footage, and we're just like watching him watch footage, or we're basically reading his descriptions of what he's seeing. So it's kind of an odd start. The only thing so far that has like really captured me, that like gave me like a little bit of the chills, was the scene with the rabbits, where they have like the cameras around their neck. That's all I have to say for the first 50 pages. There's some other stuff happening too with a character called the Rogue, who like I'm not totally convinced is human. So that's also been kind of interesting. So let's continue reading.
0, 1, 2, 3. Let's get started.
Last update of the night. I got to the second part. So previously we were 20 years before Area X, and then part 2 is going to be 18 months before. So we're jumping ahead in time a little bit in the next part, but I have quite a few little tabbies. Oh my god, can you hear the geese? Quite a few little tabbies so far, because I think he's dropping a lot of foreshadowing, and I'm wondering if he's like straight up telling us what's going on by way of old Jim asking questions to himself and just his own like musings. So the biologists are dying off kind of one by one. If I didn't say, this is going to be quite a spoilery video. So buckle up. There was 20 of them to start with, I think. And none of them have names. That's another thing. They're all named like Team Lead 1, Team Lead 2, the Mutter, the this, the that. Like the only way that we are defining them is by their title, like how Central has defined them, which is obviously quite interesting, because it's kind of like saying, are they dispensable by Central, because we're not actually giving them like real human names, like we're not calling them by their names. Anyway, so they experience this, there's an interaction with this character named the Rogue. He looks like a man. Looks like a normal man. I don't believe he is a normal man. He's not human. There's been so many vague descriptions of like light and blood coming out of him or emanating from him in some way. There's an interaction that the biologists have with him, while there's also torrential downpours, and so their whole area is flooding. And after that interaction, they're like, some of them are trying to unalive themselves, basically. So we're off to kind of a rough start. There's literally only one survivor by the end of this little expedition, and she disappeared. We don't know where she is. She's known as the Mudder, Mudder, because she was like walking around in the muddy swamps. We don't know where she went. She's gone. She's gone, girl. Old Jim is just like sitting there in front of the computer, you know, behind the desk, because he's not fit for some reason to be out in the field, like doing field work. And he says he's just thinking to himself, which is what a lot of this is so far. Had all the rest, like everything, all the crazy stuff that's happened, had all the rest been an extravagant psyops pyrotechnic display. What? Like, is Central behind this? Did they kind of plan this? Is this all part of some big experiment? And then we have the idea of mimics, which I think the first book brought up, if I remember, in Annihilation, which is coming in play with the rabbits, because the rabbits were obviously acting very strange. I don't know yet. I have a lot of thoughts. We're still like very early in. I'm only on page like 70. So I'll update you tomorrow. Good morning, guys. It is the next day. And I hit the 100-page mark in my book, so I thought it would be a good time for a little update. I feel like we are getting the ball rolling finally, and we did find out he has a problem with alcohol. So, and there's some irony in that, which I'll talk about in a minute. So he's basically an alcoholic, and so I assume that was part of the reason why Central no longer thought he was fit to do field work. But like I said, now things are picking up. So he is allowed to go back into the field. I keep saying the field, and by that I just mean out about in the world and not stuck in the basement looking at footage. It's finally starting to feel kind of like a spy book, and we finally see how he's going undercover. It feels very much like CIA operative, like going undercover to work at a bar of all places. That was the irony that I mentioned earlier. He's given sort of like the rundown by another Central agent, and they're telling them about his cover and like what it's going to be. Like, I like that we're actually getting somewhere, and he's sort of being given his assignment, if you will. So that's very exciting. Something else that happened right before the 100-page mark that I feel like is important is we finally get the names of our 2 team leads. But I'm hoping, because now we've been given names, that means we're going to start like getting closer to them. So finally we're sort of getting, some more intimate details about who they are. And then the only other thing I wanted to mention was fire as a theme or like a metaphor. I don't know what exactly the metaphor is for yet. This is one, I'm going to read this little quote right here that I tabbed. This is one of those moments where, like, one of those lines where it feels like the author is trying to be, like, he's trying to say something really deep, but he's using words that are like so vague that you don't really know what he's saying. And that's happened a couple times already where I'm like, but Jeff, what are you saying? So the quote is, "What was a person sometimes but a wandering fire, but put the flames out, and what was left?" So I don't know what the wandering fire is exactly. What emotion or state of being are we saying the fire relates to? Your guess is as good as mine at this point. Okay, friends, it is time for another update. I'm on page 173, so I'm not quite halfway. I just looked at the page numbers. It's about 440 pages, so 220 would be halfway, so I'm sort of getting there. Okay, quite a bit has happened since I last updated you. I don't think I mentioned about the daughter. Did I mention about the false daughter? We had some of the first kind of very uncanny moments. I mean, we kind of had it with the rabbits, but now we've had it with like a human or a not human, a clone. Basically, his estranged daughter, Cassie, something like that, Cassandra, has come back into his life suddenly, into Jim's life, but it's not her. We're definitely pretty sure it's like some sort of government robot or clone or something like that. But they're basically being forced to work together. He's ingratiated himself into the town, and now this clone of his daughter is like his partner, sort of. Strange dynamics indeed. And then I think I mentioned earlier the whole fire theme and him being like, am I the vessel, the flame, or the candle? Like, it's like this philosophizing that he's doing. Wondering about, like, I guess what type of person he is, but he's decided that he's the vessel, he's the empty vessel. So hoping that the flame stays lit. So I think it's a seems to be now a pretty on the nose metaphor for he's sort of hollow inside. He hasn't really felt a lot of purpose in his life, we can assume, and so he feels like the empty vessel. To be totally honest, I'm not super gripped by it, but I mean, I'm definitely going to finish it. Like, I definitely want to know where things are going. We're starting to get a few more details about some of the characters. We're starting to get a little bit more intimate with them, which I do appreciate, because a book that is very philosophizing and has all these kind of uncanny moments in it, sometimes it can lose the humanity of the characters, because we're sort of out here wondering about all of these strange happenings and we're not super focused in on the people in the story. One of the biggest things I forgot to say, there's a person who works at the bar, an employee, has admitted to finding one of the cameras, potentially one of the cameras from the rabbits, that he couldn't destroy. He tried to like dissolve it in like a vat of bleach or something, and it didn't work. Basically, there were some really scary things on the camera. Every time they watch back the footage changes. It's like showing them different stuff. The other employee at the bar saw his own death. And then eventually he either dies / kills himself. He was like found on a boat. He was like a fisherman. He was found out on his boat. Something to do with the alligator that's on the cover. They're calling her Tyrant. We do have weird things happening in the past that our current people in the town aren't really wanting to come forward about. So it's like the townspeople know that there's like some shady, weird stuff, but nobody's talking about it. Good morning, guys. I am gonna talk kind of softly because boyfriend is asleep in the other room. But I'm finally like a third of the way done, or no, I have a third left, roughly. I'm on the next part. So I don't even know what that is. I don't know what that's supposed to be. But page 305. The first and the last. 1 year after the border came down. So before, we've been in the past, like before Area X, and now it seems that old Jim has been to Area X and he is now changed because of it. So now it's a year after the border came down. So I've been putting a little tabby in every time something that feels significant to the plot happens. So this is good. To be honest, I don't remember when I last updated you. I now have 4 full sticky notes. And then I went ahead and started on the other sides. They actually end up letting him speak to the medic who was there on Failure Island, which is basically like the pre-Area X. That's what they were calling it before. There's something is off about this person. And in the same way that Cass is off. And old Jim knows this. And so he actually pushes him off a cliff. And then the guy just like gets up. Like he literally falls down the side of a cliff. And then he just like stands up and brushes himself off. So clearly we know that the people who had experience either with Central or in Failure Island are off in some way. Alrighty friends, it is now the evening. I have eveningified the apartment. We've got a candle, but I wanted to get on here and say I am in the home stretch. I have less than 100 pages left. So this is what I'm gonna sit here and do for the rest of the night because I'm to the point where I'm really ready to be done with it. It's getting a little bit repetitive. Honestly, we're in a really cool part now that I have less than 100 pages left. The first expedition is finally there in Area X and we're seeing all these weird anomalies happen. So we're finally getting to like the good creepy part that I was hoping more of the book would cover. I am starting to look at my physical TBR stack and just realize how much that I have. I think instead of doing something else or just chilling and watching YouTube for the rest of the night, I am gonna attempt to just get through the last of this book so that I can move on to some of the stuff that I have here on my stack. Okay, it is 6 o'clock on the dot. I am on page 369 and I have this much left. So let's see how quickly I can finish. Alright friends, you have made it to the end. We are finally done with this beast of a book. I have metabolized my thoughts. I will say, there are probably people on Reddit, and there have been since the original trilogy came out, who have been analyzing these books for years and have probably pulled on a lot more threads and come up with a much more kind of cohesive vision for what these books are. But I will give you my interpretation. Let's dive in. First of all, we have the 3 separate parts. Dead Town is the first part, and that is where we are following old Jim as he is basically just looking at footage. He's been basically desked, for lack of a better word. So the very first part all feels very distant. That's like the first 60 something pages. Then as we move into part 2, which is called The False Daughter, this picks up a little bit. So part 2, we meet his cloned daughter. Actual word clone is only used one time. That was the word that I was using before it eventually came up in the book, so I feel like it's a safe word to use for whatever these people or beings are. Part 2 definitely starts to feel a little bit more like the X-Files. So Cass is kind of the Scully to Jim's Mulder. It definitely starts to feel more like a detective novel. We have this other clone, we think, who's just referred to as the Rogue, who we see sort of wandering around Deadtown, and eventually we find out that he, or at least there's a theory that he has some sort of connection with the biologists from the first expedition. Maybe he had something to do with their deaths. Then we get a lot in here relating to sort of a reveal that old Jim has been mind controlled, which should not come as a surprise because Central is obviously this very shadowy kind of 3-letter agency. So it is revealed that Jack, who is the sort of central operative, he's been mind controlling him. So there's been these lyrics that Jim's been playing on the piano throughout, and we've just always assumed maybe there was some sort of metaphor in the lyrics, but actually we find out that the words are literally manipulating him. Luckily, the Rogue, he is the one who ultimately kind of allows Jim to break free because he gives him these mind control words. Eventually, and this is where things really start to ramp up, Cass leaves Jim these clues that lead him to Town Hall, to City Hall, and for whatever reason, that is the place where the Rogue's lair is. And I was imagining, like a typical City Hall building, but once he's inside the lair, it's like a cave. He describes himself as he feels like a caveman. There's like names of expedition members written on the wall. There's like things in jars, like specimens from Area X in jars. And who is waiting for him but the Tyrant? So the Tyrant kind of pokes her head out of this big pool that's in the back and does take Jim to Area X. So now the Tyrant is kind of viewed as this like godlike figure. There's a lot of biblical allusions in here, a lot more than I would have expected from a speculative fiction book. Anyway, when Jim finally returns to our normal world, he is now a clone, for lack of a better word. He is now fully considering himself to be a vessel. And this is another metaphor that comes up. This is probably the one that we are beaten over the head with the most often. There's gotta be at least, I didn't count every single time it came up, but there's like 7 or 8 different references for the fire, the candle, and the vessel metaphor. Eventually we do get some more kind of insight, and we realized the whole time it was kind of foreshadowing to him becoming a clone and him becoming a vessel. So fire comes up a lot as well, or the flame of the candle comes up a lot. And so that combined with some of the biblical allusions, I thought maybe was supposed to be sort of a baptismal trial by fire kind of remaking metaphor for the clones. So I don't know, that was kind of me trying to make a very tenuous connection between like the biblical allusions and then every single time that he brings up the flame and the vessel. And then finally in part 3, we are following a whole new character. So it's a little bit jarring at first. Part 3 has become sort of infamous because the character Lowry, who we're following, who is the last and only surviving member of the first expedition, he curses a lot. He's on, all of the expedition members are on like anti-anxiety, almost like anti-fear drugs in order to keep everybody calm. They're all very high. I sort of redacted all of the swear words just to give you an idea. So if F-bombs offend you, you're not gonna like reading this last section. So part 3 is the first and the last. And we basically watch him, we already know, right? Because we know he's the last surviving member. So we already know like all the other 23 people who are on this expedition with him are gonna die. So we kind of already know what's gonna happen, but I feel like that kind of ramps up the tension, I guess. So we slowly watch, literally one by one, as various things happen to all of the other members. He's the type of person who will just absolutely destroy anything in his path if he feels like it's going to try to destroy him first. But ultimately, it's kind of what allows him to escape and survive. And then Lowry does turn cannibalistic. later on, which is pretty disturbing. He just straight up describes how all of a sudden somebody's dead body just is like the most amazing smell he's ever smelled. He starts with the foot and he works his way up to the face. It's very disturbing. You're gonna want a strong stomach for that passage if you choose to read this book. Then he gets shot by another expedition member claiming to be the cloned Cass, but she's going by another name. So she shoots Lowry and then he survives, but not in a way like, oh, he was lucky, in a way like it felt good. He says like nothing felt better than being shot, whatever that's supposed to mean. So obviously he has come back from Area X changed as well. Because the bullet has like no effect on him. Now that we can kind of move past the plot points, I found the writing ultimately very descriptive, but also very repetitive. And I think I mentioned this, but there's quite a few typos. And I feel like it literally feels kind of unedited or kind of lazily edited at times. The vessel theme, again, that was very redundant, very heavy-handed. And I just felt like, whereas we got like 7 or 8 references to this flame candle vessel metaphor, it would have been nice to maybe only get 3 or 4 references, which would have been enough, and then clearer descriptions of other things that were very much less clear as to what was happening. It did feel like my brain was a little bit melted by the end. I was so done, but also that's kind of what's happening to the expedition members. So we're sort of getting like how they're, how maybe they felt, and the kind of just a tiny little bite of the mindset that they would have been in, because you're just like, what is happening? You know, your reality kind of starts to melt and shift. That's always kind of interesting. I've just come to expect that with Vandermeer. And then we have no ultimate explanation for what the anomaly is, for what started Area X, or at least none that I was able to discern from his writing. And I feel like Vandermeer is not the type of author to entertain us with like a very clear-cut answer. I'm always gonna kind of stick with my theory that it's just sort of an alien, it's of alien origin, and they have some sort of mimicry ability, and that's essentially what it is. It's this sort of area, whether it's like metaphysical or literal, some sort of alternate reality that you can enter that loves to mimic whatever organic material is available to it. And then the last thing that I'm gonna say, because I think this is really fascinating, and I just have to like stop thinking about it at some point in time, because it becomes too meta, and I just like can't, my brain doesn't brain after a while. But Vandermeer was inspired by those Reddit threads that I mentioned briefly at the beginning, of people trying to untangle what the heck Area X is and what it means, and also some academic like thesis papers analyzing his work, analyzing the trilogy. He's read it, he attempts to read everything, and then kind of integrate that subconsciously into his work. And so this is kind of, how do I even explain? I feel like we could go down a very meta rabbit hole when talking about where he gets his inspiration from, because it's like, just like Area X kind of twists our reality to create its own haunting version of reality, Vandermeer created this book through the lens of others' interpretation of the reality and the story that he's created. I don't even know if I'm like explaining that in a way that makes any kind of sense, but I just think it's very meta and very cool, but also just absolutely melts my brain to try to think about. So I'm gonna stop there, and you guys please let me know what your interpretations are in the comments below. Did you read this book? Are you gonna read it? Maybe I spoiled too much. Honestly, there's so much more in here that you could dive into that I didn't even really get to or dive into in depth, because there's just so much. I would be here for like 4 hours if I did that. So honestly, as much as I have explained and told you in this video, you could still read this book and get out of it lots of nuance and lots of other interpretations and other things that I didn't mention. So you guys let me know, and thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.